let's continue. I'm loving the energy though. Let us continue with the conversation. So I think we're going to spend another, let's call it half an hour to like 40 minutes-ish on this task, and then sort of move on to the next one, because we have until 1 o'clock. So I mean, I think a 2-hour stint is a decent amount of time for the other task, or just under. So yeah. So just as a quick recap, where we were before the break, we're now transitioning from the IOD. Sorry, we're still in IOD, but we're transitioning from the planning phase into the actual doing, right? So we're busy unpacking the trigger here, just to make sure that we're comfortable in terms of what a competent outcome looks like. And we spoke specifically about trying to specifically identify the components of a task, but you could have a different term of talking about it. But the importance of identifying the component of the task is because once the examiners put in components, what they're going to do is when they profile a competent candidate, they want all of their components to be addressed. Okay, that's going to be the bare minimum. Don't do that, and you're already shot yourself in the foot. So that's why this is an important step from a planning perspective. Okay, so this is a review task, unlike a drafting task. So we'll speak about a drafting task in task B, about how you can approach that. That was the key question I was asked earlier on this morning. How do I start? Okay, so we'll talk about how do you start a review task with this one, and task B, we'll talk a little bit about how you start a task where you have to almost like draft something, like you have to articulate or discuss something. Okay, so let's transition now. So then in the attachment, in the first attachment, you're given the performer journal entry, spelling it a bit off, and then you're given a transaction summary, right? Now remember the context that we had coming into this, right? The context we came coming into this is that we have an expectation of what the journal entry should look like, but also an expectation of what we expect, what the information we want the examiner to give us in the IOD. If they don't give us, we are going to, it's a review task, we are going to raise it to say we need this, even if it's a drafting task, that we need this information to conclude our objective. I cannot give you a pro forma entry without X, Y, Z information, okay? And you articulate why you need that information. That's typically also some indicators, but we'll see how that will play out. Okay, so I think what we need to do on this part, now, like I mentioned, the case study has to develop, right? So your curveball is not going to be brand new, it's going to be development. So here, this is case study development, right? Or you can call this a curveball. This is a curveball. You haven't seen this information before. Boom, now you've got all balance sheet, or you can call it a curveball if you want to, right? But technically speaking, or like I think the technically correct word is case study development. So let's work through this information. Now, what are we trying to do? So we know we have to review journals, right? And do a complete assessment for journals. And we've done our first reading of everything, okay? So I'm assuming that this is your second time you're reading this, or the third time, depending on how you approach your reading of the information on there. And so you're aware of the lay of the land. So you know that the first part of this attachment is background information, and the second part is a bunch of journal entries. You've done your initial thinking about all of the issues in your first read, not really putting too much pressure on yourself. You've also tried to unpack the components, not putting too much pressure on yourself. But the second time or the third time you're reading this, where you're saying, in fact, now I need to actually unpack my plan. So now reading the first time, I had a general idea of what was being asked. Now I need to put it on paper. X, Y, Z is what I'm being asked, right? Happy. So now we know the lay of the land. Okay, so I'm making that assumption, and that's all in terms of the attachments. Okay, so now we come back. We're reading this. We're actually doing. Now, when you read this information, because remember, key to a review is your expectation of what you expect to see. Okay, if you don't have an expectation, you cannot perform a review. So now we've been given more information, case study development. What we're doing now is we're continuing to generate our expectation from what we want to see from the journal entries. Okay, and then as we sort of work through this information, and I'll pick 1 or 2 examples because we don't have time to run through all of it. We'll just discuss it. Let's unpack together what our expectation is of the information. So Fojan acquired 100% of the equity of Big Ranch on the 1st of January 2022. The price is to be settled as follows. Okay, fantastic. What is the question the answer that somebody had for me earlier on? I expect the examiner to give me how we paid for this investment. There's your expectation. Like imagine how that would feel, right? Like, okay, I'm shot. I wanted this information. I'm getting it, and I'm prepared in terms of how I'm going to deal with this. Fair value everywhere, right? That's pretty much the principle for consideration transfer. And of course, maybe just being careful of stuff that's not part of the business combination, right? You would have revised like stuff we paid the previous founders to stay employed, right? You would have revised transaction costs as well, right? What's separate from the business combination. So those are the 2 key principles. What's separate from the business combination and everything pretty much fair value. Okay. An immediate cash payment of 14.1 million on the 1st of July 2021. Okay, cool. Okay, cash payment 14.1, but hang on. The number is different to what I saw as an investment. So what are you doing now? This is now practically what Kamogelo said. You're linking the information together. You're combining what you saw in the PRI with what you're seeing in the IOD. Now, as an examiner, I want to capture that. Okay, now, this is all happening in your brain right now, right? But I want my assessment to capture the fact that you can make those connections, right? So in here is going to be something to do with that difference, because obviously that's the action that you're performing, right? And we'll see how to filter through all the way to the indicator to ensure that you're demonstrating all on the day thinking. And in fact, some strawmans, profiles of competent candidates, include in there evidence that you are thinking on the day. So one of the stuff in here that you could have never prepared for, sort of specifically in the PRI period, right? You could have had an idea that this could come through, but you could have never specifically prepared for it. So one of those type of things. And then that indicator for me as an examiner maybe will be crucial for a competent candidate. I'll need you to know that you can think on the day. Okay, maybe sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. Okay, like I wanted to say, I don't set the exams, I haven't seen them, so I don't know. All I'm talking about is what I've seen in the past about how they assess. Okay, which can be an indication of the future. Cool. So now we're connecting the dots, right? 14.1, 14.5 is a difference. What's the difference? We don't know yet. Okay, but we're running our nose fossil. But immediate cash payment, we're comfortable with the treatment. Credit cash, debit investment. Simple. Okay, we just have a missing 400. A further cash payment of 4.5 million payable on 31 March 2024. Should the audited results of Big Grant exceed FY22 by at least 25%? What are we thinking there? So I hear some mumbles. I hear some mumbles in the chat. I'm going to deal with your question, Katie, shortly. Can I hear the chat answer to my question? What are we thinking here? I'm getting one-word answers from the chat. I think focus on quality rather in the chat. Even if it takes you a little bit longer, I will consider your comment. Tell me why. We're all good at throwing out terms. Throwing out terms is not going to get you indicators, right? Let's speak the entire thought and then I'll unpack the entire thought. In the room as well? Yeah, go for it with the hand. Why? Absolutely. So future event, confirmation of which, now I'm just paraphrasing, will, I guess, confirm or whether payment needs to be made and not within the control. Or, yeah, I guess, let me not paraphrase with, I'm going to use the word control, okay? That the confirmation comes to later. And what is the key thing that I did there, right? And what I'm asking the chat to also do, because we need to practice stuff now, okay? It's fine, you can throw out a term, okay? You can throw out a term on your response. You're never going to get indicators. What did I have to ask? Why? Your examiner is always going to ask that. Now, we always say you need coverage with depth. I always get the question, what is depth? Depth is why. Respond to me in such a way that I don't need to ask you why, right? Because deferred consideration is wrong. As an example, continued consideration is right. But from what you're seeing in the chat, do you know the reason why one is in and one is out? One is in and one is out, type of thing, right? There's no reasoning there, right? So your depth of your response comes through from the why, right? And we are all afraid of the why, right? But in truth, that is where all the magic happens. Okay? You can throw a paragraph reference at me, and the paragraph reference can be correct, and we all love paragraph references, right? Wrong, nothing. I mean, it's right, but nothing. You're not going to get an indicator. There's no indicator that says, and we're going to run through the indicators, correctly identify the paragraph reference that deals with continuity, because you're never going to see it. Okay, so let's get used to always articulating the why, right? So have we lost connection again? No. Are we still in? Sorry, it looks like
yeah, we can still hear you.
Yeah, just give me a second. Cool. All right, sorry about that. My little support device here just dropped out, so I'll just bring it back in. So the why is important, the depth, and we're going to practice that when we look at the actual review. We're going to tap it out together. What does a response with depth look like? Okay, so as we engage, as you're creating your expectation, I want to hear the why. Okay, I don't want to hear a paragraph reference. The terminology is also fine. You don't need to get the terminology right. I want to hear why are we saying this X, Y, Z? Okay, so we've got continued consideration. Now I have another question, right? Which means we haven't met the depth requirement yet. We've identified it. We've said why. But now my next question is, so what? So what? In the room, in the hands. So what? Yeah, you can. Yeah, the mic's coming to you.
You recognize the fair value of that contingent consideration.
Fair value. So recognize contingent consideration at fair value. I'm going to write your initial recognition. Okay. Do we have the fair value at this point? No. Could the fair value be the reason for our difference? Thoughts? You see, I'm still trying to connect the dots. Could the fair value be the reason that we're missing 400,000 here in the consideration? Because remember, on the balance sheet is 14.5. I think someone online's unmuted. Was it online?
Yeah, it was me. No. I just wanted to ask.
Okay. Yes. Someone online, go for it. Sorry.
Yeah, I see you wrote there that I'm hearing myself. You said we should recognize at fair value. Yeah, it's fine now. So I wanted to ask, doesn't it count against you if you're not specific which fair value? For instance, to say, what's this acquisition date fair value?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I've got at initial recognition here. Yeah, because fair value when, right? So initial recognition at acquisition date, same story. Okay, agreed. Agreed. Okay, go for it. And Mike in the room.
I don't think it comes from, or it could account for the difference. Okay. Because in the pre-release, we were told that the amount of the 14.5 million that we were seeing in the Fs is specifically a cash amount that was paid. But if this is a contingent consideration, it means that there was no cash that would have been paid at this point, as this is, yeah, the cash component would be contingent upon a consideration or a condition that's still to come. So that cash should not have come out. So it can't be the missing link between the 14.1 and the 14.5.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Agreed. We're connecting the dots, right? And I was having a conversation during the break. Doesn't matter. I'm just doing this for the sake of our conversation. But it doesn't matter for you to almost like identify which one of your points is a review comment, which one is a completeness point, just for the purposes of our conversation. And you don't have to have in separate sections. You can give them all. It's like our conversations. So now we're connecting the dots. Remember what I said. Okay. The information, we need to see it as one, right? So now imagine how much of your time is going to be wasted.
Hassan, you're muted.
You know in your mind that, no, wait, hang on. I've thought about this for 5 days. It was a cash payment. This is not a cash payment. Boom, done. 2 seconds. But now if you have to read the PRI again to find where I don't even know where the information is written in the PRI, you know, you're going to waste your time. So you want time management? Time management is a problem because the stuff is all in your head. You're looking back at your file to try to find these links. And if you're not doing that, you're just missing the links completely because you're not making the links of the information. Let me just deal with the chat quickly. No, Shumana, people shouldn't meet me, let alone warn me. Is it possible to determine the fair value of this contingent consideration? And absolutely, that is a great question. That is a great question. How do we determine this fair value? And I'm going to throw another question: this fair value, right? Would it be a complex exercise? Maybe we need to call somebody in. And then what's the other point that I wanted to make? What about subsequently? How do we treat it? Right? Because remember, we are doing pro forma entries. Okay, risk is, I'm just thinking about business combination. But what about the rest of it, right? Because you're going to recognize this contingent consideration. And then going forward, how do you treat it? Okay, maybe a point worth mentioning as well, right? In terms of your analysis. All right, and then okay, I'm good. Okay, and then what did I want to mention? Cool. So this is the point. So now let's articulate this. Let's articulate this response. Okay, because indeed, spoiler alert, there's no journal here for the contingent consideration. Right? So it is a complete point. Okay, let's finish this thought. How do we articulate this to get our point across? That's another question I came to, and I'm going to type it out. Can I hear thoughts? Can somebody verbatim articulate this point for us, and then we'll take it from there? Sorry, I think someone had a question before I got it. Okay, so I addressed, is it possible? Okay, transaction costs, you are right, it's transaction cost, but we don't know that yet, right? So I'm just trying to simulate the process, how you would go about doing this. But I guess you would know because you read the whole thing the first time, but yeah, just yeah. What did I want to say? Play along with my game. Okay, we'll get to the transaction costs. Yeah, can we articulate it? People in the chat, I'll give you a minute as well, minute or two, right? You actually have the best advantage because you can actually just type it out and share a comment in the chat, and I can copy paste it across. Actually, I can't. I could type it across. So can I give you all a minute to write out how you would have articulated this, or just think about it if you want to, this review comment, and then we'll unpack it. And then what we'll do is we will go to the marking grid. Okay. First of all, we'll check whether or not this is an indicator on the marking grid, because remember at this point we don't know, right? So I mean, we could be writing stuff that's not there, but we know it's a completeness point, so it's within the scope of the task. So we expect it to be on the grid as an indicator, but I mean we don't know where that is. So we'll go to the grid and see first of all if it's there, and then we'll read the indicator, see what it says, and then we'll see whether or not we would have been able to get it. Okay. So I'm going to give you all a minute, and then we will go all the way to there. Okay, minute up. I'm going to check in the chat first, and then I'm going to come into the room and hear what we have. So Mosei says the consideration paid for this transaction should be accounted for on date of acquisition at its fair value. I would recognize the actual amount because the payment temporary does not exceed 1 year to apply. They just, okay, that's I think commenting on something else. I'm going to skip that. Transaction cost must be expensed, not capitalized. Okay, cool. Okay, Leander says count again, hectic. Timeline, people, and I say this all the time, can't be making those mistakes. Okay, let's go for it. All right, so Museri first. The consideration paid for this transaction should be accounted for on the date of acquisition at its fair value. Theory dump, waste of your time. Okay, I'll read that, great days. I would recognize, okay, I think you comment something else. Transaction costs must be expensed, not capitalized. Yeah, correct. Theory dump, waste of time. This amount would need to be included at the cost of investment as it makes up the purchase price of the date of theory dump, waste of time. There is no journal for the further expected payment of 4.5, which is the contingent consideration, and should be added to the acquisition journals to correctly calculate for goodwill. Okay, getting there, Lerato. I think we can work with that. Okay, I'm going to board off that. Okay, more than 1 year. All right, there we go. This looks like a nice one, Brighton. I noticed Ralph did not conclude the contingent consideration of 4.5 million. This was incorrect. Beautiful. Identifies the issue. Step 1. What is it that you've seen that is triggering your comment? In a nice, succinct point from Brighton. Beautiful. As an assessor reading this, I'm now in a good mood. Okay, this person has identified the issue appropriately. We need to determine the probability of reaching 25% of the audited profit. This means Fojan maybe, fell into an obligation to deliver cash should be profit target be met. The fair value of this consideration should be included as part of the consideration. Okay, getting there. What's missing is, the discussion we're having about it's the why. The why is missing. Okay, the so what is there. Okay, we need to include it as fair value. Okay, so the so what is there, but the why is missing. Brighton, but great start. But it says you're hectic. Belinda, the continued consideration should be recognized at acquisition at fair value after considering the probability of exceeding profit by 25%. Not there. But yeah, touching, it almost has one piece, but not the rest of it, right? I note you capitalize the transaction cost. This is incorrect as, complete your thought. Nothing there at this point. The amount has been excluded from the investment, hence we need to include a contingent present value, not complete. Okay, so do you see how, right? Everything that was in the chat. Correct, like I didn't disagree anything principally there, but the point was not complete, okay? And we run the risk here, okay? I don't know what the indicator says, and I'll get you your hands ready. The indicator could say, identifies the need to include contingent consideration, okay? Then a lot of these points will be fine, because identifies is just you acknowledged that you are aware that we need to include contingent consideration, and you can do it in many ways, right? That's a very low hanging fruit indicator. And the indicator could be that. But what could the indicator be? The indicator would be discusses whether or not, or it could actually be very specific, discusses that the further cash payment is contingent consideration and concludes it needs to be included as fair value. None of those sentences would hit that indicator. So what should you do in your response? Respond as if all indicators. Oh, sorry. That's me. That is just the alarm at home. I hope everyone is fine. What did I want to say? Yes, you should always target the more detailed one, right? This latter indicator that I mentioned. Because if you discuss it like that, and if there's enough information to discuss it like that, if the indicator is identifies, then you'll get the indicator, irrespective, right? But if your response is always, we're so good at identifying stuff, right? We're fantastic at it. But are you good at unpacking an issue fully so that, and remember the context of which you're responding. So if I just come and say, because remember what you spoke about initially about Ralph, we said, right? He's struggling, he's got limited knowledge, he's done these journals, and we're going to forward what you're responding to him so that he can fix it and send it to the auditors. Okay. Now, if your response is, let me find one. So I'm not picking on anyone, but let me just find one. If your response is the consideration paid for this transaction should be accounted for at the date of acquisition at its fair value, in response to this particular point, but what is Ralph going to do with that information? Okay, so Ralph needs to understand exactly what you're talking about, identify the issue, step 1. Okay, he needs to know that is incorrect. This is incorrect. Right? He needs to know that this is wrong. Right? Or this is inappropriate, right? Because you need to make it softer. Somebody mentioned like, oh, you need to consider our tone. Make it softer. This is inappropriate. This is not aligned with IFRS. Okay? You don't need to say this is wrong to make your point across, right? But why is it wrong? Okay? The further payment meets the definition of contingent consideration because XYZ we discussed. Okay? Because the payment in the future depends on whether or not we hit this profit target, right? Which is a certain event that will be confirmed at a future event. Okay, now what have I done? Principle and application at the same time. Okay, you didn't hear me saying per IFRS 3 point paragraph B, whatever. Contingent consideration is, I don't even know which paragraph to be honest, is defined as blah, 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 and then apply. A waste of time. Did you hear me just hitting the issue in one concise sentence? Okay, so now Ralph knows what you're talking about. Ralph knows that it's incorrect. Ralph knows why it's incorrect. Right? But now Ralph will be like, oh, okay, wow, okay, it's wrong. Now what? Okay, I don't actually know what I need to do. Right? To appropriately account for this, or however you want to segue into this, we need to recognize a contingent consideration at its fair value. As a liability, at its fair, or equity, right? But in initial recognition, fair value. And then we need to cap the contract, we need to capitalize that as a cost of the investment. Right? So now your response is holistic. Okay. Then next step, somebody said, oh, how are we going to value this? The valuation of a contingent consideration is a complex exercise. Okay? We're going to have to incorporate the probability that we're going to meet, that big grant will meet those profit targets, and consider the time value of money, if material. Maybe worth consulting an expert on this point. Done. So I'm not just saying like, oh, we need an expert for evaluation. I'm just going to be like, why? Why do we need an expert? But now you've articulated the complexity of an assessment like this, of a valuation like this. And therefore you're just throwing it out there as a thought. Maybe we need to get a valuation expert to assess or to confirm or whatever the case may be. Because also this is I would imagine this is a material business combination. So it's worth getting this number right. Okay. Questions? Go for it in the front.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Esson. Before you go to the next one here, so where do I stop to get my indicator? To say I've done enough coverage and breadth. Because the way I put it, I just say the 4.5 million is a contingent consideration because it depends on the big range reaching the 25%. Therefore, it will be incorrect not including the purchase price. Mm-hmm. I stopped there.
Mm-hmm. You run because then remember, yeah, I'm Ralph. So
you're not yet happy?
No. You just told me what I'm doing wrong. So it will be incorrect not including. Yeah, you're right. I'm not disagreeing with you. You're right. You're right. Right. Yeah, I could describe. I could ask you. I want to get to Santa. Right. I want to drive to Santa. Can I describe how to get to Santa? I'm going to turn around. I'm going to do this. And you say to me, that's not the correct direction because of X, Y, Z. And then that's where you leave it. Have you helped me? Right? But so do you see the importance of what Kamogelo mentioned about understanding your audience? What are you trying to, because I think the mistake we make is we think this is still ITC, right? We're trying to simulate real life. And what is the objective of what you're trying to do? You've been told that Ralph to understand the stuff. He needs to fix his calculator and then send it to audit, okay? So we can do a fantastic job at pointing out why things are wrong. And we're good at that. Imagine somebody just told you this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. That's what they do. Have they helped you? They haven't helped you. You almost say this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. This is how you need to go about fixing it. So a complete response to get the depth that you're talking about. And I think somebody put in the chat, which is quite cool. Identify the issue, agreed, that's Tato. Why it is an issue, okay? And how it must be solved. Right? I like using this acronym. I always think IPACs. Right? So issue, and I put the principle and application on the same line because I do this simultaneously. I don't waste my time doing both. So I do it separately. Then I conclude / suggest way forward. So that's why there's a CLS. Every single time. every single time. And it's fine. Even if your review, even if every single one of your review comments says, I note that, I know that, I know that, I know that, I know that. No one cares. It's fine. Absolutely fine. Right? But what that's doing is keeping you honest to the process. Okay. Question at the back in the room.
I just have a question around the correcting part.
Correcting.
Yes, when you're supposed to be correcting Ralph, because like when I thought about it, because I think you mentioned we would need to sort of like, we've sort of concluded already that it should be recognized as fair value, right?
Yeah.
But then within the standard, it speaks about how there's something to consider before you determine whether it should be recognized. So for example, you recognize only if there is an obligation for us to actually then settle this amount or whatever. So then I would have asked that he considers whether or not we have an obligation before, because then that will determine whether or not what he has done is actually correct or incorrect, because then, yeah, that will state whether if there is an obligation, then he was incorrect in not including the fair value, and therefore he should recognize the fair value. But if there is no obligation, then he's correct in that he didn't recognize it. But then going through that, like, how do we know when to just get to the end and then going through?
No, absolutely. You need to take the examiner through your journey. So here, the payment depends on profit, right? So it's not as if like I can decide to pay you or not, right? Therefore, that obligation point would be relevant in that scenario. Like say it was a choice of Fojan whether or not they want to pay this additional amount. But here, it's beyond the control because Fojan needs to pay this amount so long as that requirement is met. So the definition of a liability will be met. But your point is still relevant though, because you've identified an issue that you think needs to be addressed. So you wanted to first articulate that, listen, this actually meets the definition of a liability because you have enough information to make a conclusion. And it meets the definition of contingent consideration. Therefore, everything else we spoke about. Yeah, that's fine too. That's perfectly fine too. Okay, let me just check the chat, then I'll come to the question in the room.
Hello, Asin, can you hear me? I had my hand up first. I just have a quick question.
Okay, so I'll get to the hand shortly. I just want to make sure that I've got everything else.
Can you guys hear me?
Okay, Tumela, I'm going to read what you put there also shortly because it's the same point. I'll read it towards the end. I don't know if it has been asked. My question is audit CCS, but I need to explain how to do it. I would like to read what I wrote. Yeah, I will get to the hands as well. Thank you. Okay, so the one question that I want to address is Tembu's question. The completeness test is tricky. How do I know as to how far I can go in my depth? Is it determined by my audience or competent components of the task? Yeah, completeness test comes from expectations, right? So a completeness test is not saying per IFRS 3 paragraph 1 we need to do this, per IFRS 3 paragraph 2 we need to do that, per IFRS 3 paragraph 3 we need to do that, per IFRS paragraph 4 we need to do that. That's just theory dumping, waste of your time. A completeness test is what we've done here, right? You notice something. I noted that there is continued consideration here. This is why I believe there's continued consideration. Therefore, this is why I believe it needs to be included, right? It's almost triggered by something, right? Let's ignore the franchise agreement, right? For now, let's just ignore the franchise agreement. Let's think about the brand, right? I would expect a company like Brick Ranch to operate under some sort of brand, as typical with restaurants like these, right? IFRS 3 requires da 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 da. So do you see how my completeness test is being driven by an expectation? Right? This expectation is being driven by what you read on the IOD. In my second example, it's being driven by your knowledge of the restaurant industry, right? But it's being driven by something. So completeness test is not a laundry list, right? To your point, it can get tricky. Where do you know how far to stop? You stop to the extent that you believe something is missing because there's a reason something's missing. It's not a laundry list. Okay. And depth. Now remember, people, what I have here, IPACs, you can use IPACs for discussions, you can use IPACs for reviews, whatever. Like there's no rules to this. It's just to say, how do you completely address a point to meet the objectives of what you're trying to do? Okay, so don't memorize rules, memorize principles. Okay, why have I drawn on this IPACs thing? Okay? You didn't hear me say, oh, in every review question, you must always use IPACs. Did I ever say that, right? I said, what am I trying to do? I'm trying to help Rolf understand where he got wrong and to fix his problem so we can send it to audit. Therefore, I'm going to draw on IPACs as an approach to keep me honest, to make sure that every single point I'm addressing meets this objective I'm trying to achieve. Right? Okay, think like that. Don't think, oh, review, do that. No. Think principles rather. Okay, now what we discussed here is a holistic discussion. Like I said, I don't know what the trigger says. Okay, so many of you are probably thinking like, oh, is this what I need to say all the time to get an indicator? No, we'll go through the indicators now. You see the different types of indicators. But what I'm saying is, if you answer like this, then it doesn't matter how the indicator comes through in the marking grid. You will get it. If it requires detail, you'll get it. If it requires you to just identify, you will get it, right? Because you've unpacked it like this. If you just throw out terms, right, and you don't fully, so that example that I was given when I was giving the example about driving to Cape Town, he said, no, sorry, to Santon, and he was like, no, I described what he did wrong, but I didn't give a thing. Does that mean I won't get an indicator? I don't know. I haven't read the indicator. We can read it now, then we'll decide, right? But the indicator could say, identifies that it's wrong, and then proposes a way forward. Then you wouldn't get that one. Okay, that's the message that I'm trying to send. There's no rules to this. What is the objective? Real life. Okay, let's look at the indicator. Right, so let me just see if we can find it. So first of all, you see if it's here. There you go. Journal entry number 5. Identifies that the fair value of 4.5 continued consideration was omitted. Have we done that in the way that we have responded to the issue using IPACs? Yeah, we have. Did we get lucky? Identifies, right? There's a low bar here. So as an examiner, I'm only looking for you to be able to identify the issue. That's what I'm looking for. A very low bar. But we've got the indicator because we have a complete response. Okay. Now look at this one. Identifies. Ooh, we're not going to do this one, so I'm just going to spoil it. Identifies and explains why. Blah 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 blah. So now, if we don't have a complete response and we just identified, we're going to lose out on that indicator. But as a candidate sitting in the exam, you don't know what the indicator is going to look like. Right? So I wouldn't play dice, right, and hope that they're all identified, because there'll be very few identifiers. There'll be a lot of discussions as well. Right? I'm going to rather make it a point that my responses are complete. So whether it's identifies, explains, discusses in detail, discusses and concludes, whatever the examiner comes at me, whatever shapes of this indicator comes, I've discussed it, I've identified the issue, I've discussed it, I'm going to get the indicator. Okay, questions? I'm going to get rid of this so that it doesn't spoil the rest of our discussion. I see we've got 2 in the chat, so in the room, and then anything in the chat. Can go ahead with the room, yeah.
Okay, my question now is more about the approach, and
yeah.
This is to say, I find myself, I've got the transaction summary, I've got the journal entries, I need to review them. So when I read this first paragraph of the transaction summary, and then now linking it to journal 5, how do I approach me responding to the task in a way that I do not waste time? I don't know if my question
we pretty much spoke about that. So you don't have to link it to journal 5. That's just something that's being done probably because we don't have access to the strawmans and the profiles of the competent candidate. But I think that was done to in my assumption. Okay, if you look at the indicators, they've split the journals. So review, right, with these general, or I think most of these journals are more completeness tests. So my assumption is that competent candidate, what we're looking for is coverage amongst the journals, the review, coverage on general, the completeness test. And you need a coverage in both to get a competent outcome. So I suspect that's why they split it. So it was more a factor of trying to formalize the assessing. But in your response, you don't have to link it back to journal 2. Yeah. But in terms of how to respond so that you're not wasting time, we did that together just now. Yeah. And those are asking me to repeat myself. This is recorded. You will have access to the video, so you can always go back and then replay that part of the video.
Hello, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, there was another question as well. Yeah, thank you. Inside.
Sorry, Asen, I think it's a similar question to his, where if the question asks you to maybe review something, but they don't ask you to make suggestions, would you still need to add, I suggest that you do this and this and this, or are you wasting time doing that? Because it's going to become lengthy. If
good question. So and it's tough for a review question to not need you to almost like somehow address what the right answer should be. So my suggestion is I would like just keep it to like one sentence. If it's not clear to you that the required task rather requires you to propose solutions or to how to resolve, I'll just keep it to like one sentence just to make sure that you've covered it. That's a great question. I don't necessarily think it's a waste of time. I still think it's, if you just keep it to one sentence, then you're good. And like what should have been done, you don't need to go to town with it, right? Like you don't need to say, therefore you need to recognize, capitalize the investment and then recognize a liability. You don't have to go into that much. Just like saying you need to recognize a continued liability, continued consideration as a liability at fair value. That's sufficient as a argument. Was it a hand? Oh, I think I've left the hand up for a while. Sorry about that. Can my first hand please go up? Online?
Can you hear me?
Go.
Okay, so my question was, when you were explaining about the point of contingent, I never know when to explain something and when not to explain something. For example, the identifier just said the identifier that is a contingent consideration. Knowing me and being scared of not answering, like missing what was actually gonna like result in a mark or whatever they call them, I would have most probably went into detail to explain why I thought it's a consideration. But I see in your question, you're like, a contingent consideration. In your response, you're like, it is a contingent consideration, so you should have done this. And that's what we're answering as well, only because we're under pressure to respond in 1 minute. If we're sitting and we have the whole 8 hours, some of us would have went into detail to explain why we think it's a contingent. So that also extends the amount of, like, it makes our answers or responses much more bigger than what we think is necessary. And then when you look at an HC student, they just have 2 lines and you're like, wow, when do you know this is a lot? When do you know no, now you have to, stop. Don't explain contingent consideration, because it's almost like it's automatic, but it's not. I know I would have went to an extent of explaining what contingent consideration is in so much detail and why I thought it is.
I don't know whether it got lost in translation somewhere, but you have to definitely explain why is contingent consideration. So if you look back to this comment that I have here, okay, what is the issue? That was identified quite nicely in one of the comments, right? I note that, right? I note that, right? Principal application, right? You need to articulate why you believe this contingent consideration, right? So future payment, and confirmation depends on a future uncertain event. Depends on.
Okay, sorry, I must have missed it. Sorry.
Event. Okay. Conclude. Therefore, continue consideration. Okay, so just way forward. Needs to be recognized at fair value. Recognize liability at fair value, and capitalize or recognize as part of investment in sub. Okay, so certainly you need to do all of those steps, right, to have a complete point. Okay, that's my message. But then my message is, and I'll repeat, at this point when you're responding, you don't know what the indicator is going to look like, right? And when you look at those past responses on online as examples of HCs, Cycle doesn't give you the marking grid, right? So you don't know what the marking grid said, right? So you have this in a concise manner, right? I note that this you can do in one sentence. This you can do in max 2 sentences. This you can do in a quick few words. I'll say one sentence, so now we're at 4 sentences. This you can do in another sentence, 5 sentences, right? You're tapping on 5 sentences, right? The request is not to go to town, but you're just writing on 5 complete sentences to get your point across. Okay. For this particular indicator, it's so worked out such that even if you just identify that there's continued consideration, right? By applying the principles, you would have still been able to tick off this indicator. It just so happens, but if it just so happened that the marking grid was designed such that it was an identifies and explains, or identifies and proposes a solution, you wouldn't get that indicator. So what I'm saying is, I would rather don't gamble and try to figure out whether or not, like, should I go to town or not? I say, think about the objective of the task. What am I trying to help Ralph with? And then do what you need to do to meet that objective with every single point that you pick up. And then what happens in the marking grid, whether or not it's an identifies, discusses, doesn't matter. If you've unpacked the issue appropriately, you will get the indicator. So you almost like nullify the impact of how the thing is phrased. Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. I hope that answers your question. It's a very important question. Yeah. So Brighton agreed. Even if it's not really cannot see it, I would definitely always propose a solution. Even if one sentence is like, hey, this is what I think it should be. Because I agree, Brighton. Just raising concerns about a solution for me doesn't feel complete. Even though it's not clear, I need to propose solutions. Okay. Always think solutions. There's a hand. Let's go. Another hand online. Go for it. I'm going to mute my side.
Hi, Asen. So in your response, you had mentioned that we need to consider bringing in specialists, right? So now I wanted to ask, how do I know when to advise that we should bring in specialists, especially when you're dealing with some parts of tax and in this case, valuations? Because I've been penalized in some cases, and they told me that I'm a CA, so I should know why am I even bringing in a specialist?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of negative marking at an APC level, so I don't know what you mean by penalize. But in terms of an expert, I think also as a chartered accountant, and also the context in terms of the type of chartered accountant that you are in a scenario becomes quite important. And also, I guess, it's a risk assessment, right? So if you think about Task B as an example, in Task B, we're going to be speaking about very complex VAT issues, which do not necessarily have sort of clear guidance. And there was the recent case law which ran up into the Supreme Court as well, back and forth to get an outcome. Now, as a CA, you learned the basics of the definition of gross income, general deduction. You know your lay of the land, but it's almost like it's complex VAT, in which as a CA, it would actually be irresponsible to advise from a place where you believe that you know such complex tax, right? Or let's say a schedule that you've never seen before in tax is triggered, right? And you have to learn it for the first time. Again, it's the same thing. You have to almost be cognizant that I've learned this thing. I'm not an expert in this field. Maybe there's a little bit of gray. I've seen a little bit of case law. So maybe it's worth engaging with a tax expert to assist with thinking through some of these things. Valuations as well. Valuations can get complex, right? There's complex assumptions. Now, remember, you understand the mechanics of a discounted cash flow in the context of giving you all the information, right? I'll give you the inputs to calculate WACC. I'll give you the inputs to the cash flows. But have you ever, if I told you to value this room that I'm sitting in, right? How would you determine the WACC of the weighted risk, whatever, weighted average capital cost of capital? You can see now, too much accounting in my head. The weighted average cost of capital for a building like this, right? You'd say, okay, I know the principles. I need to get a risk-free rate, lift it up for some sort of premium, blah, 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 blah. But then what is the risk-free rate? What premium are you applying? What do you live? So that type of stuff, you need to get some, it's not an issue to get some expert advice. IFRS, typically, the sentiment is you're the IFRS expert, so you're the accounting expert. So yeah, very seldom is it appropriate for you to say, get an accounting expert to assist with accounting. So yeah, so that's my view on that one. In terms of how you can get a sense. Don't just throw the statement everywhere. The point is perform a risk assessment. Is this a high risk here of are you a specialist? Is it reckless for you to be providing this advice without getting some input from an expert? You're not like shipping off the responsibility. You're almost saying, listen, I've identified these complexities. I think we need to get some assistance from an expert to help us conclude on this. Okay, so that's the exit point. Happy? Okay, and auditing, yeah, typically auditing, you are the expert as well. So rare that you're gonna need an expert for those two areas, would it be appropriate? But tax, valuations, some concepts in management accounting, definitely. There's some scenarios where you need it. Okay, let's continue going. So next one that I want to discuss on this one, last one, is, let me think. There's two here. I don't see which one's better because I think I want to do one more, then we're done. Okay, let's do this one. I wanted to do 2 and 3, but we don't have time. Let's just do number 3. Okay, so now number 3, we're being told here that Big Ranch has existing relationships with its regular customers. Right, fantastic. We thought about this during the previous period. Okay, what are the missing assets and liabilities that the Big Ranch would have not recognized, right? And we thought, okay, customer list, because I have a bunch of customers you mentioned. So yeah, there's a potential we could recognize here. And I asked you to say, okay, fine, think about the profile of the customers that would come into a company like Big Ranch, and whether or not that profile would, to your expectation, meet the criteria to recognize an intangible asset. So I think I'm going to pause here before I actually read the sentence and open it up to the floor again and say, in your reflections in the PRI, so let's go back to the PRI process, right? You say potentially we could, Big Ranch could have customer lists, and potentially I may need to recognize an intangible asset. Okay, that's you, the principle. That's you, the principles. And then you say, come on, let me apply to the extent that I can. Okay, there's not much information in the thingy about the profile of, well, maybe there is. I can't recall very specifically. So can I just hear some thinking? And I like somebody's opening the standard here. Fantastic work, right? I love that. That's where the answers are in the standard. Yeah, let's think about that. Let's marry the two. What are the principles of recognizing a customer list? Okay, and there are a bunch of examples in the illustrative examples of IFRS 3, different types of customer lists. And can we marry it to the type of customers you'd expect Big Ranch to have? And then can we form an opinion in terms of what we think? And then let's come onto the day and see what we've been given, and then see if we can make a conclusion here. So I'm going to give you all a minute because I see a lot of standards opening, which is fine. I'll also share it on my screen here. For those that are online, maybe you don't have the standard, and then we can unpack. So I'll give you all a minute. Excuse me. That's my voice. Okay, there's a bit of a reminder of the general principle. Obviously, there's more, but that's a general principle if you get a little bit of a boost to remind. So it's quite small, and it's over 2 pages. So let me just try to do that. I'll zoom into that. Okay, that's a piece that we all want. Actually, I think there's more specific down here. Okay. I think that's enough time. Are we all comfortable with the principle of intangible assets, customer lists? And now can we deal with thoughts? So can we talk about the profile of the customers Big Ranch is getting? in terms of like are the customers walk in, walk out? Do they have to register before they buy? Do they have to take a picture before they sell with us? Like, can we link the two? Can somebody give me some analysis? Can somebody give me some analysis? Anyone? People, can we connect the dots? This is a primary principle. What are we thinking? Nothing to think about in the pre-RI. That's also an answer. Is it impossible? First of all, do you think a company like Big Ranch would have a customer list? No, why not?
There is no contract for agreement that sort of takes place before service to provide to a customer.
Yeah.
So there's no way that you can pay to say, I have this customer and then this customer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you're not sure about the person.
Yeah.
And purchase again. So how do you see on?
Yeah. Oh, but we don't have a mic. Sorry. Did you manage to hear it? No. Okay. So just to summarize what was said in the room. So sorry, I think the mic's battery is dead or somewhere along these lines. So the response to the question that I asked, the response was essentially no. If you think about the profile or the type of customers that a company like Big Ranch would get, is that they'll walk in, think about your experience at like a KFC Spur, you walk in, you buy your stuff, you leave, right? Because the first question is, what is the unit of account? What are we recognizing? Are you recognizing the actual person, customer, or are you recognizing the customer list, the information of the customer? Okay, that's a very first important point. Are we recognizing the customer? No, you can't recognize the customer, right? As the point was raised in the room, you can't control the customer. The customer doesn't have to come back to you, just like workforce. You can't control the customer. Therefore, that is out. I cannot recognize the customer. Can I recognize the list? Question is, do I even have a list, right? Maybe the loyalty program, yeah, has it become active or is it an idea? Absolutely, Judge. Maybe that somehow I can collect people's details and something that I can monetize, right? But I mean, just thinking about it, wow, that's Leander, a very detailed response. I'll read that. Yeah, so yeah, very 100% accurate analysis. And then the question is, now remember the intangible asset criteria is twofold, right? Because you spoke about contract a lot. Like I don't have a contract or contractual right, but it can also be a contractual right, or it can be a separable right. Right? So if you get up the hurdle of meeting the definition of intangible, right? There is a list. The next question is this thing separable? Can I detach it from Big Ranch and sell this list separately and make some money? Okay. If I meet that criteria, then I'll also meet the definition of intangible. And understand it goes into a lot more detail to say, listen, with customer list, there's quite a unique scenario here because you could be restricted by law, POPI, that you can't transfer the names of customers, right? Therefore, if you don't have a contractual right, but you have this list, you may still be restricted from transferring it because of the application of law, confidentiality agreements or so. So if there are confidentiality agreements, if there's law, you don't have an intangible asset. So all this type of stuff you'd have thought about in the pre-release period that you can think about. Right, specifically to Big Ranch. So when it comes on the day and you see specifically what you have, and we'll just unpack that quickly, then we can now come in with our expectation and then read what we've been given about this customer list and then see what our review comment is. Let me just quickly engage what's in the chat here. It's quite a lot. And there's a hand. So let me just read the comments and then I will come to the hands. Okay, Belinda agreed. K-Man. Yeah, loyalty programs, we've spoken about that. Okay, agreed, Judge. Yes, agreed for the loyalty program point. Agreed, random drivers, sorry, diners, happy Shumani. Agreed customer loyalty program. Agreed blessings. Agreed K-Man. Okay. Leander, even though the big branch may have loyalty customer base, simply having customer base not enough to ensure assets are reliably measured and inflow of become benefits probably the customer secured by contract and would be compelling evidence, but it stands that there's no guarantee of revenue. Furthermore, if management does not deem the revenue as probable, the future revenue less the cost associated with revenue should be a valid asset. Over values, there should be some adjustments for the risks market. Therefore, should be removed unless, can I talk about that? Review that because customer relationship is correct to conclude customer and others. Okay, so other relationships maybe, no control customers. Okay, Camilla also the same sentiment. Can I have the hands online? Sorry. Oh, let me mute myself quickly.
Hi, Asen. Hi, Asen, can you hear me?
Yes, he can hear you, Katla.
I was just asking for point 3 because there wasn't clear evidence that we could interrogate whether the customer lists meet the separability and the contract criteria. For those type of questions where it's not clear, is it where we should rely on our pre-release research and at that point to make it more applicable on the day for this type of questions? Or if you just said it is just incorrect to assume capitalization, you should have considered the IFRS 3 paragraphs on intangible assets.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, great question. Cover that. We will cover that. That's why I picked point 3 specifically. Okay. So just to come back, there's another hand. Okay, one more hand. But I'll cover your specific question shortly. Another hand. Jump in.
Son, my view is with regards to the existing relationships and the way we are saying because the customers for restaurants are all okay, no information, customer information is left at the restaurants. But with the current developments in this restaurants business with regards to issues like dial and delivery and the issue of corporate purchases, what is happening in that industry currently. I think there's an element of information which is collected for these customers. So I wanted to dispute the argument of saying, oh, these customers are okay, therefore a customer list will not be updated for a restaurant. That's my argument.
Okay, cool. I'll address that comment too. I'm done with the hands. Cool. All right. I guess just a quick comment. No. So I wanted to actually address Chumani's comment. Chumani is a ball of commentary, a fly on the wall, busy commenting about our session. So yeah, just to cover that. I don't think it's an issue. I think it's actually fantastic. All the people, I mean, quote unquote, love letters that are being written. I think that's awesome because these people that are writing these love letters are actually engaging in the session, right? So I don't want to it seem as if I'm sort of ignoring the love letters, but I'm not. I actually am speed reading through it and picking out points that I want to unpack with them. So I'm just receiving all the comments and then we can unpack the points together as we go along. So people online, keep the love letters coming. I am reading them and I will address what it is that you are writing. I much prefer the love letters to the one-liners. Okay. So I guess on the top, so the letter from from Leander. The point that I want to pick up from there and sort of agree with all your points is your point on recognition, right? I want you to be a little bit careful in sort of IFRS 3 principles, because remember, from a recognition criterion, IFRS 3 just says if you have an identifiable asset or you've assumed the liability, right? You recognize this thing at fair value. So the probability of an outflow, and I think you refer to it a little bit later on in when you say you speak about the valuation technique and a lower or negative value, that comes through in the valuation. So if there's a low revenue that's probable, all those factors need to come into the valuation to determine the fair value. But it doesn't mean that you do not recognize the intangible. Because as soon as you meet the identifiability criteria, you need to recognize the intangible. Then the question is measure fair value, and then you can bring in all your probabilities into the frame. Okay, so that's what I wanted to mention on that one. Cool. Agree with what Brighton says. Tumelo, is it appropriate to recognize intangible assets for existing customer relationship? This does not meet the separability criteria of legal. It's because there's no mention of frequent issues. Since customer list is acquired in a business combination, the conversation big branch, which also is a poppy. Therefore, customers should be submitted into Google. Cool. So the first point that I want to raise in terms of Tumelo's point, touching on it, plus the second question that was asked in terms of bringing in industry. Okay. So yes, agreed, right? You can bring in a lot of insights from industry, right? This is typically what industry, fine, happy. But fact of the matter is your facts and circumstances are there, right? So your primary assessment should be what is in your IOD or PRR. What are the facts and circumstances applicable to big ranch, okay? And then you can bring in your industry stuff to supplement, right? So in industry, typically XYZ supplements, but it's never your primary. Your primary is facts and circumstances as you read it on that bullet. Everything else you assume. Okay. Now, last comment or question on what happens when you don't have enough information, right? So let's quickly read that sentence, right? We've analyzed these customer relationships to death in your groups. Okay. Now we're like, okay, fantastic. Point 3, talking about customer relationships. I'm going to get all the clarity I'm looking for because in your mind you're thinking ITC, and we'll tell you, oh, blah 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 details so you can make a firm conclusion. Okay. APC is a whole different ballgame. Okay, let's have a read. Big Ranch has existing relationships with its regular customers, which are factored into the negotiated price of the business. Right? So we paid for this regular customer business. The Fojan brand has placed a value of 4 million on these customer relationships. That's all we have. Is it enough for you to make a conclusion on whether or not we can recognize these customers? Is the fact that we value this thing enough to say we can recognize it? I have a bit of shaking heads in the room. Okay. In the chat also, blessings, I've got a no, right? I've got a hand. Can I get a mic, please, in the room? I get another one from Belinda. No, it's not enough, but you can go ahead.
I think for me, I think I would sort of be able to conclude. So they're telling us that it's been factored into the negotiated price of the business, but if there's a chance that this could possibly be an intangible asset, right? That 4 million valuation is a bit of a concern. So I feel like wherever I possibly land, that 4 million, I would possibly conclude that you would want to get someone to possibly evaluate that, like an independent person, because they're telling us that the board is the one that has placed the value of the 4 million. So if there's a belief that there is a fair value, then they should get like an independent person to sort of, I don't know, value that customer list, provided that there is a relationship. Or, sorry, train of thought. Because they're saying that there is a relationship, right? So the independent evaluator will help them in determining whether that relationship actually does have any kind of value. So by getting them involved, you'll basically get to, you know, a conclusion. Is there a relationship? And if there is one, then they'll give you a fair value. If there isn't one, they won't give you.
Okay. Cool. Okay, thank you for that. So I just want to check the comments just in case there's anything else supplementing what you said. Okay, Choga agrees. How is the value determined? Okay, I want to unpack Mthembu's point. So we can, yeah, go for it at the back. Comment at the back.
So I think before you get involved with the independent valuator, you probably first have to look and see what assumptions has been used in order to determine the 4 million, and then also then compare that to, you know, what is the industry doing currently with regards to contract lists and how they value contract list debt. And then depending on the complexity of that, then you can refer to an independent valuator.
Yeah, agreed. So I don't disagree with any of your comments. Okay. But Shingi as well, I think, is touching on the same thing, right? So let me just read Shingi's comment. No need to identify if it meets the definition of intangible control order. I would need to know if there's any contracts in place. Okay, maybe kind of. Okay, but the point I'm trying to make is recognition, measurement, right? We've had a lot of conversations about measurement, okay, which are very valid, I agree. But the first, because we're reviewing the journal, right? And all your points are very valid from is that 4 million reasonable? Okay. Do I need an expert? Okay. HLA. Okay. What is the basics? Recognition. Can I, before I even talk about measurement, right? Because I mean, if I can't recognize, measurement is irrelevant, right? So key question, can I recognize an intangible asset? And I think Mtembu touched on it in the chat here, right? Is this thing, do I have enough information to conclude that I've got an identifiable asset here, which is this customer list? So I'm going to go back to my initial question. All your points of valuation completely accurate, right? I agree with your comments, but you've gone a little bit too far and you've forgotten about the initial. Okay, so Tammy G says, I would require some additional information with regards to the customer list to be able to make a conclusion on whether or not this forms part of assets acquired. I say so because intangible assets should only be recognized if they meet physical separability and contractual or legal criteria. Customer list does not usually arise from customer obligation, however, can be exchanged, so determine date, And if it meets separability criteria, you would have to then be correct. Okay, cool. So I think how I want to close this discussion, I think we're getting there, and I think we need to move on to the next point, is you don't have enough information here, right? So what does your analysis look like? It looks like I am unable, so let me just double check what they did. Okay. Number 3, customer list, 4 million. Customer list, 4 million. Okay, cool. So I note that, always, I note that you've recognized a customer list of 4 million rand separately from goodwill. I am unable to conclude whether or not this is appropriate or not, because the information that I have at my disposal, whatever, is insufficient. Okay. Principal application. We can only recognize these customer lists as an intangible asset if Okay. From what I gather from the information, right? Cannot conclude that. What I know from industry, this is not coming from your PRI, typically, blah, 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 blah. Therefore, I'll require X, Y, and Z to make a formal conclusion. Okay, and you move on. That's how you deal with where the information is vague. Because remember, real life, like it goes back to the initial point that I raised. Identifying issues is you demonstrating competence. Right? As a CA in business, just being able to like sense a problem, that's key. People that can't sense problems are terrible chartered accountants. Okay, so just by doing that, you've been able to articulate that. Listen, this is actually a very complex analysis. I need more information. I've seen X, Y, Z in industry. This is the information that I need to in order to conclude. And then how does that filter through into the grid? Logically argues whether the customer relationships are identifiable intangible assets. Logically argues. Where does the logic come from? Your pre-release thinking, your industry background, your expectations and your assumptions that you're making from your PRI. Logically argues whether I don't care about your conclusion. Okay, I care about your analysis, right? People come out like, oh my goodness, that thing was an intangible. It wasn't, and we're stressing. Don't care. I care about how you thought through the criteria, whether the relationship is an identifiable intangible asset. Okay, so you can expect the information to not be perfect. in APC. Okay, you can expect information to not be perfect in real life, but are you able to identify that the information that you have is insufficient? Okay, and note what you need to make a conclusion. Or are you reckless? And you just like go in there and be like, okay, this is XYZ, I'm going to conclude in this way. Okay, that's reckless behavior. Right? Because what's the basis of your argument? Oh, my basis is that because Spur recognizes customer list, I'm going to do the same. Okay, that's not a difference. Okay, you're not going to see a difference if your competitor does it, you can do it too. Not there. It's based on your facts and circumstances. Okay, so I'm going to have a look at the comments just to close. You will have all of this. It'll be uploaded, so don't stress, you have it. The onus is on you now to go through the rest of it, right? We've spoken about the skills, we've spoken about the principles. The reason why I'm not too concerned about sort of having a little bit less time for the next one is because we're not going to go over the same principles. We're only going to discuss the new skills that are evident in the new task, right? The key is whatever you're learning here, apply it again in the other task, right? You can do it, you've learned it. We don't need to repeat ourselves. I don't need to share the same things twice. Okay, so we only focus on the new stuff. All right, any questions in the room? And I'm going to just cover the chat very quickly, and then we can move on to the next one. Now, we're not going to have time for a formal break, so apologies. So if you need to step out, go to the bathroom while I'm looking at the comments, please do so. Online, you can jump out, go to the bathroom, I don't mind. So please just do your refresher in between while I look at these chats and comments. No, we're still online. Yeah, we can chat afterwards. I note that you've recognized the customer list of 4 million intangible assets. This is incorrect because Fojan may not be allowed by law in terms of protecting financial customers. That's Fojan Council. Therefore, we need to de-recognize customer list. It doesn't meet the official test as I'm guided as I'm trying to apply IPAC. Yeah. So courage. Yeah. So your point is fantastic, right? So I like your point of where you said we may not be allowed because you're acknowledging that I don't have the full information, right? I haven't done research of Poppy, right? I just know it exists, right? But I haven't, nothing triggered you to actually go and do there wasn't expected of you. But you have a sense that there could be some laws and regulations, or you got a sense that there's no contract, or you have a sense that nobody has to register. So that's giving you the discomfort for us to recognize the intangible. And I need more information as an example. But you would still be able to tick off that indicator because you've logically argued whether or not the customer relationship is identifiable using the information that you have. Okay, so I'm happy with your response. Yeah, so blessings, I'm happy either way. Okay, so concluding or saying I need more information, I think that's all good. IPAC, Kamokelo, you can go back. Okay, thank you, Emmanuel. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next one. So I'm just going to give it a few minutes, probably like 2 minutes, to just stop this recording and then start the new one. So if you need to sort of run to the bathroom quickly, for more than welcome to, even online. We'll resume in the next 2 minutes.
Hi, Austin. Don't know if you can hear me. You are muted if you're speaking to me. All right, sure. So do you by any chance have a list of the HLA indicators? Because I feel like those are all primary indicators. And I'm just wondering if some of the arguments that I've made in my attempt are a reach or if they're like reasonable.
Sorry, so you're asking me for...
Mute myself.
Sure. So you're asking me for just like the rest of the application? Or sorry, it's when I get a sense of what you're asking me for, sorry?
I'm asking if at all in Namu, I'm assuming that y'all compiled the indicators, right? Are there any HLAs that were identified for those tasks, and what would they be?
Yeah, there were a few. I can go through them quickly as well. I'll just share when we come back. Okay. Let's continue on our journey. So yeah, just a question at the end towards the HLAs. Yeah, there were HLAs in this task. They're on the screen there. Again, you have this so you can work through it. So yeah, things like identifying or questioning or considering. So considers is like a high level, right? Considers, just thinks about it, just points it out. Let's say, hey, Ralph, we need to take a step back, way all the way back here and say, are we even comfortable with the definition of a business here, right? So that was an HLA, stuff like making sure accounting policies are aligned before consolidating was an HLA, talking about the pre-existing relationship was an HLA. Interesting enough, the right of use asset and lease liability discussion was an HLA. I would have think that's primary. Discussing, because it's a struggling restaurant, so discussing impairments, subsequent measurement is an HLA, and then experts for whatever matters. So evaluation or whatever the case may be was also an HLA. Okay, so and I guess the message with HLAs, you can see, because I'm going to get the question is, oh, am I going to know what's the extent? How do I know? Consider this, consider that. Focus on the focus is here. Okay? In your reflections, if you don't tick these, then your question should be, why aren't I ticking these? Because these are primary indicators. This is what is expected of you. These are nice to have. Right? These are almost like over and above. So the criteria for this is really gray. Depends on the examiner, depends on the mood, depends on the research. So I would don't focus. If you don't tick these, if you tick them, great, not great. But if you don't tick these, then that's your problem. Okay.